Hey everybody, Grace here. Welcome to another video. I hope your holiday season is going well. Today I'm going to sit down and look at some top 8 deck lists from the most recent Patreon World Championship qualifiers, 47 and 48. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't participate in either of these tournaments. I got pretty close last year to winning a few of these. I'd really like to get over the edge and do it, but I'm just busy. Just got a lot going on, and the weekends are very often difficult for me to get to play these events, unfortunately. So very often this YouTube channel is my way to express myself in this game rather than the actual, tournaments themselves. It's just, it is what it is. Life happens. So, maybe next season I can block out some time to play a few of these and get over the edge with one of them eventually. But anyway, enough about me. Who cares? Let's look at these deck lists. My plan with these videos is to do this every few weeks or so. I don't really want to make something after every tournament, but every few weeks I'll sit down and look at some top deck lists. Of course, first and foremost, massive shout out to GOATformat.com for hosting this event, running it, and of course, massive shout out to Mr. JDZ, the legend, for putting out these videos. That is essentially what I'm doing right here, but done a lot better. And he does these after every single Patreon. He puts out these recap videos where he goes through the top 8 deck lists. So if you haven't seen those already, check those out before you watch this video. These are located on the GOAT Format YouTube channel, as well as attached to the event page on goatformat.com. So let's get into it. All right, in 8th place, we had Ricksaw running a very unique build of Earth Aggro. As much as I like to talk about the decks themselves, I also got to talk about the duelists. And Ricksaw is one of those people who's come onto the scene not that long ago. I think I remember playing against him like 7 or 8 months ago in like a GOAT Format Friday finals, and I raged at him because I thought he slow rolled a Mirror Force on me or something. I don't know. It doesn't matter. We didn't get out to a good start, but I've played a lot more against Ricksaw recently, and really like him. Great guy, and it's really good to see him doing well. He can play a lot of decks to a very high level, and one of those duelists that comes into the scene and immediately just shows that they can duel. So yeah, big shout out to Ricksaw, and he got 8th place playing like I said, a very unique build of Earth Aggro, running Solemn Judgments, which you typically don't see, running Grand Margs, running Spy, running Big Shield Gardna. Now I got to give a shout out to Jace, the great Australian duelist, as well as Nova Ethos, one of my friends. There's a certain Discord where there's some discussion of different offbeat strategies, and they kind of brought this idea to the table of running more tributes in Earth Aggro. Their version of the deck was relying a lot more on Big Shield Gardna and running Zaborgs rather than the Grand Margs. But Ricksaw kind of took this idea and ran with it and made his own version of it, which is awesome. I think it's really cool what he did with this deck. And a few things that I'll point out right away that are quite interesting. Obviously, like I mentioned, the Solemn Judgments. That's one of those things in Earth Aggro that has not always been played. Like typically the spell trap spots that Solemn occupies are used for extra copies of Dust Tornado or multiple copies of Smashing Ground. But if you're running tributes like Grand Marg, you don't always need the Smashing Ground, though Grand Marg covers face downs or smashing hits either. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. I'm not 100% sure. We typically, like I said, historically with Earth lists that have done well, we haven't seen these triple copies of Solemn Judgment, but they have proven effective in aggro decks. I mean, triple Solemn is a must in Warriors, which functions a bit differently than Earth, but at the same time is still an aggressive deck. So I don't know. I don't know about the Solemns. I don't play a ton of Earth, so I can't really comment on the pros and cons or whether or not to run these. But I definitely think it's interesting, and I suspect we might see more Earth decks playing Solemn Judgments in the future. So if you play a lot of Earth, or let me know what you think. Do you prefer the running Smashing Grounds more heavy on the Dust Tornadoes, or do you like this idea of potentially playing triple Solemn in the main deck? Some other things to point out. Running the Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke. We haven't always seen Earth players run this. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I like this card a lot in Earth just because you're running Rhoda anyway, and this helps deal with things that are going to slow you down, like Spy, Reaper, cards that are quite popular right now. Also seeing a Zing in the main. Like I said, we typically don't see that in Earth. Most of the time it's Dust Tornadoes. Bottomless Trap Hole in the main deck as well. A Brain Control to help even further your aggressive strategy. I remember I talked a little bit with Ricksaw. He did say there was some changes that he would have made to this list. I can't remember exactly what they were, but Very cool list. Double skill drain in the side deck. I'm curious what he brings that in against. Potentially against the control matchup. I'm not sure if he would bring it in against like Chaos Turbo or something. I don't know, but very cool to see the skill drain in the side deck of a topping list. One Faith to kind of bring in to throw the opponent off, potentially games 2 and 3 when you know the knocks are coming out of the deck. So very cool list. Shout out to Ricksaw for getting it done with a unique strategy. It's always an uphill climb to do well with something that's a bit offbeat. So yeah, shout out to Ricksaw. Great finish. 7th place, we have Evilforlife, who won the previous Patreon World Championship qualifier at 46. Another one of those duelists like Ricksaw, who is not, hasn't been around forever, that is pretty new to the scene, that has just immediately started to play really well and have success. So yeah, shout out to Evilforlife. Pretty standard warrior build, I'd say, for the most part. When we look at, warrior decks, Chaos Turbo decks that are, pretty well defined, mainly what we're looking for is different ratios. And so he's electing to go with the triple Blade Knight, pretty standard monster lineup for warriors, I would say. We see the one Zambira in the main as well, one Book of Moon. Sometimes warriors kind of have this one flex spell spot. Sometimes people will put a Minecon in the main here, sometimes like a Smashing Ground, sometimes the Book of Moon. I like the Book of Moon, just, super versatile, can be used in a ton of matchups. And then, of course, everything else looks pretty standard for the most part, I would say. In the side deck, electing to go with the one Bottomless. We're really starting to see Bottomless find its way into a lot of side decks and main decks. It's one of those cards that you need to be conscious of when you're siding it in, depending on whether you're going first or going second, is very important with this card, because if you go second and, your opponent goes Blade Knight, sets 5, and you have the Bottomless in your hand going second, it can be a little weird. So you got to be conscious of when you're bringing this in. One Compulse, I'm sure, against the control matchup, and the rest of this looks fairly standard. Yeah, shout out to Evilforlife for another top one of these events. Next, in 6th place, we have NateDog playing a GOAT control strategy. Shout out to NateDog. I love this guy. Great duelist, great person. If you watch my GOAT format War League recap, he was playing control in my match versus him in the War League, and I just got destroyed. NateDog can play a lot of decks well. He's good at Cold Wave Monarchs as well, so just absolutely clapped me a few times with that list. So yeah, shout out to NateDog playing GOAT control. This is kind of the more JCVD style GOAT control, running the DMOC along with the Prima and the Call, running double Solemn in the main deck, which is typically not always seen in GOAT control, but it's there to kind of ensure your big pushes can go through. Jinzo, yeah, like I said, along with the DMOC, these are your key tributes that both synergize super well with the recursion spells and traps such as Call and Prima. Full triple goats, triple meta to make sure that that's the heart of the engine, making sure all of that stuff is going through, trying to slow down the pace of the game, trying to outgrind your opponent in resources, and then finally making a big push with DMOC or Jinzo to secure the game. We see the Morphing Jar in the main deck. This card is just crazy to me. I mean, I think it's so good in a deck like this because you want those complicated game states where duelists like me panic and make all the wrong decisions. So very cool to see. Air Knight Parshath in the side deck, very interesting. Rest of this looks fairly standard. The decrees, of course, in a deck like this you can play to bring in against certain matchups you see are trap heavy. Full triple spies. You run full triple faith. I mean, you run so many spells in a deck like this, you can get away with running 3 faiths. Double spy. People have said that like spy can conflict with GOAT control with the strategy, but really, if you know what you're doing, I don't think it does that much. So very well done by NateDog, getting it done with GOAT control. Very hard deck to pilot to a high level. Very hard deck to get wins with against good duelists. So yeah, well done to NateDog. Next, in 5th place, we had Jonathan LaBounty, one of the legends of GOAT format, playing Chaos Turbo. Typically, we've seen him on Warriors, one of, if not the best Warrior player in the format, playing some Chaos Turbo today, which is very interesting to see. I honestly think he probably did it just for fun, just to kind of maybe flex on people a little bit, show that he can do it with this deck as well. Maybe just to get some practice in on the list. I do think that he probably has a higher rate of success playing the Warrior strategy, but still, getting it done with Chaos Turbo, best deck in the format. What you gonna do? So this list looks fairly standard, I would say, for the most part. Like I said, I'm looking at all this my first time. I'm not an expert on a lot of these lists, but it is interesting to see some of the ratios decided here. Only one Night Assailant. That's kind of the debate a lot between Chaos Turbo players, is whether you run 2, whether you run 1. Typically, when you only run 1, you don't see the card destruction in the main deck, which is interesting to see with only one of the Night Assailants. But this can just be a completely win, like a 4th Trinity piece, basically, if you can pull it off at the right time. The rest of the deck, I would say, looks fairly standard, a bit more of a robust trap lineup than you typically see in Chaos Turbo, but it's not anything, out of the blue. With the double Raigeki break, full double like mass removal traps with the Mirror Force and Torrential. Sometimes you see one or both of those in the side. Only 1 Jar of Greed, which is interesting, and only 2 Solemn. So very interesting on a few of those ratios. You see in the side deck, this is something we've seen emerge more and more lately, is the Goats swap package in the side, and you don't see any meta to go along with it, which is quite interesting. But great duelists, are figuring out that this card can be really good in the right matchup. I'm not sure when it's sided in, whether they bring it in against the mirror match, whether it's brought in against Warriors, but it can be great in the right instance, especially against Warriors, because not only does Scapegoat slow down their pace of play, but it allows you to make those cool swap plays, and you have tons of other great swap targets in Chaos Turbo, such as used up flips, you have your Sanguine, you have your Serpent. So it's very interesting seeing the emergence of this card. I talked a bit more about this in my video recapping all the Worlds lists, but starting to be a thing we're seeing in Chaos Turbo side decks. Moving on to number 4, we have John Wick, who has been on a tear with these PWCQs lately. SJC champion John Wick. Another thing we always look at when we see decks like this is the ratios. Instead of typically 2 or 3 Dekoichis, we see just 1 and 1 Spirit Reaper. This card has been pretty popular lately as well. Rest of this, I would say, looks fairly standard for the most part. This looks like kind of a more standard trap lineup that we typically see in Chaos Turbo. As I said in the last list, was a bit more trap heavy. Everything else still looks fairly standard to me, to be completely honest. Bottomless in the side, once again, interesting to see. Moving on to 3rd, we have Madcap playing Burn. Now, this is a very unique build of Burn, playing some interesting cards, such as whatever this is. I already forgot. I don't know what this card is. This is Protector of the Sanctuary or whatever the hell. I don't know half these cards. I can't really tell looking at them right away. I know this card switches attack and defense of certain cards, so this can be really interesting. If you have like spies on the board, you can go for a lot of damage by switching their attack and defense. Same with the Big Shield Gardener, obviously is massive. So very interesting to see his own kind of unique build of Burn. I played against Madcap a few times, great Burn duelist, who running My Body as a shield in the main deck as well to protect against knocks and mass removal and stuff like that. Very interesting. So taking his own kind of unique build of Burn, putting some interesting one-ofs, such as the Protector, such as the My Body, such as this attack defense switch card, whatever the hell it is, I can't remember. Desert Sunlight, just taking his own unique build and piloting it to a 3rd place finish. So shout out to Madcap. In 2nd place, we have OG Bedsheet playing the Chaos Turbo strategy. I've got to meet him in person. Great guy, great duelist, getting it done with a fairly standard Chaos Turbo list. I would say this is about as standard as it gets, but of course, well done to Bedsheet for getting it done. We see the Jinzo in the side. I've seen this quite a bit more recently from some Chaos Turbo players. You bring it in along with the Call of the Haunted for the Call Jinzo type stuff. Getting it done. So congrats to Bedsheet. All right, and in 1st place, we have Rabid, who has been on a tear recently. Won a PWCQ not that long ago as well. I can't remember which one it was, but a few of them ago. He took it down playing a similar list and is really putting his name up there as one of the better Warrior players in the format. It's always been known. He's always been a great Warrior duelist, but like when you think of the top of the top Warrior players, you think of STL Killa, you think of LaBounty, you think of Moxies, but Rabid is slowly solidifying himself as one of the best Warrior players in the format, somebody to be feared in every one of these tournaments. So yeah, shout out to Rabid, great person. I've talked with him some theory about the game before, and it's always been really helpful. So anyway, big shout out. He's playing the kind of flip Warrior, whatever you want to call it, Thunderclap, Pile, you can just call it Warriors really. Whatever your definition of the deck is, it's running the flip. So you're running the one Magician of Faith in the main here. No Dekoichis, interestingly enough. I saw him on 1 in his previous win at PWCQ. He had a Dekoichi in the main, took those out. going with the double spy. So only 3 flips really altogether with the Faith and the 2 spies. But basically, if you can get either of these to resolve, it can be really, really good. The Zaborg, of course, very interesting to see as of lately, great against Chaos Turbo at the right time. And yeah, just a very solid monster lineup. Typically, when you see the flips, you see a bit of a higher monster count. The main deck, typically, Blade Knight is usually cut because it's very often harder to get the Blade Knight up to 2,000 attack when you have, more monsters in hand. To kind of make room for these extra monsters, typically what gets cut is like the spell trap removal, so the dust tornadoes. So he elected to stay with 3 full Sakus, which I like to see because against the mirror match, it can ensure that your Faith and your Spy can potentially resolve if your opponent summons a Blade Knight or Mystic Swordsman level 2 in the case of the Spy. So very interesting, as well as the Bottomless Trap Hole in the main, continuing to see this card find its place in the meta. And I think with the common siding patterns against warriors being the Zaborg coming in and stuff like that, this card gets even better to cut off your opponent's lights and darks. Sometimes you can hit a breaker with this. It feels amazing. So very cool to see. Of course, shout out to Mr. Big Noodle, who was running 3 full bottomless for many, many months on all of his warriors lists. Probably still is to this day. Firm believer in the card and starting to see it really find its place in the meta. So shout out to Rabid getting it done. Side deck looks pretty standard for the most part. We do see full triple dust in the side. I'm curious how, when, how often he's siding all of these, as well as the Zing, because you typically don't want to side these together. So he's probably has different siding configurations based on the matchup, based on whether he's going first or second. Rabid is notorious for being a great scouter of his opponent and knowing their tendencies. So these dusts could come in depending on who he's playing against as well. So very cool to see. Shout out to Rabid, another solid win for him. All right, so now we will look at the Patreon World Championship Qualifier 48. In 8th place, we have Marvin, who I've talked about some of his lists before. Very interesting, unique takes on warriors. Not anything crazy, but definitely his monster lineups has always been big. He's one of the only other people I have seen topped besides myself with warriors running Tsukiyomi in the main deck, so I got to give some love there for that. I think the card is good in warriors. I know that seems so strange, and I know against Chaos Turbo it's not great, but against virtually any other matchup, you really like it. I love it in the mirror match. I love it against control, obviously. I know it doesn't seem great because it doesn't always synergize with all these flips you're running. You're not running Thousand Eyes, but it very often forces out battle traps. It deals with breakers. It deals with tribes. It deals with all sorts of cards that you don't want to deal with. So I like it in the main deck, honestly. And Marvin has typically always ran this Sook in the main. Double Zambira, which is interesting to see, really making sure to, this deck seems very well catered to handle the mirror match specifically with the monster lineup that we see in the main. Like I said, when you see a more robust monster lineup, typically there's less Blade Knights in the main deck, only 2, the 1 Magician of Faith. Rather than going with the spies, kind of like in Rabid's build, we have 1 Spirit Reaper in the main deck, which is interesting. I like Reaper and Warriors. So there's so many different configurations you can build this deck, which is kind of cool to me. Running that Book of Moon in the kind of spell flex spot, only 1 Dust Tornado, double Saku, double Dust Shoot. I like this deck a lot. This looks like something I would play. I like all the ratios. Plenty. Double bottomless in the main. I'm going to keep pointing out these bottomlesses. Bringing in all 3 spies, potentially against the mirror match or other aggressive matchups, even potentially against Chaos Turbo to support the double Mobius. Spell Canceller in the side. I assume that probably comes in against Reasoning and kind of combo-oriented decks like that. So shout out to Marvin's cool list of warriors. Next, we get to Jay Harris in 7th place. Playing Chaos Turbo. Looks fairly standard for the most part. We see the full 3 Raigeki break in the trap lineup, which is something of note. Double Spy rather than the triple Spy that we typically see in Chaos Turbo. The rest of the ratios look pretty similar to me. We see the Jinzo here again along with the Call. All the Sakus, all that stuff comes in against aggro. The rest of this looks fairly standard for the most part. So shout out to Jay Harris for the top. Next, we get to Geronimo 7. Geronimo 7 playing a very interesting list. This is honestly my first time looking at this, so I need to just look for a second. So obviously we see this very robust tomato package here with the double tomato, triple Reaper. You got the Sangan to kind of go along with it. very interesting to go along with the creature swaps. We see goat meta as well. It took me a second to realize, see the goat meta in here. So this is basically like recruiter, control, swap, full triple decree, really making sure to cut off your opponent's traps. This deck looks very good. This deck looks really cool. And if you're wanting to try something a little offbeat, off the meta, this might be the kind of deck that would be fun to play, that I feel like can do well against the meta. I think a deck like this specifically, you run the control package, so it's decent against warriors just inherently, and decree. So like, the control package plus decree helps your matchup against warriors. But at the same time, this deck, in my opinion, is catered to beat turbo, really. Because you're running the double Minecon in the main. The Zaborgs, like I said, are great against turbo, and you have tons of great tribute fodder for this card, between the Reapers, between the Tomatoes, between the Spies, between your used up flips. This is really cool. I really like this deck. Very, very interesting. I'm sure I'll have more thoughts about it as soon as I turn this video off. But yeah, I just like to see something interesting like this. I think that decree swap type strategies are pretty strong right now, honestly, as we see, decks like this one that run very heavy trap lineups for Chaos Turbo. So it is interesting. I think that a deck like this can do well in a tournament. We saw that at Worlds. Some decks like this made a deep run. So very cool. I am very interested to see some of the duels with this deck specifically, to see how they played out. And yeah, I have to give something like this a try sometime to kind of look more into it. And I'm sure I'll have more thoughts later, but very interesting list. Shout out to Geronimo. And fourth, we have Purple Drunk, another staple at the at the top finishes of all of these tournaments, always doing well. Great Italian duelist playing Chaos Turbo on the full triple decree. Again, like I said, a deck like this can potentially do well against something with such a heavy trap lineup that we see in this Chaos Turbo list. So running the full triple decree looks pretty standard for the most part, I would say, as far as the monster lineup is concerned. We see the MST in the side rather than in the main. We see the control package coming in potentially games 2 and 3 against the aggro matchup. Everything else looks fairly standard for the most part, I would say. All right, in third place, we have Karina, who did really well with Chaos Turbo. Karina can play a lot of formats to a very high level. I had the misfortune of playing against her in an Edison tournament one time, got cooked. But here she is, third place with Chaos Turbo in GOAT format. So the deck is kind of interesting, a little, sort of standard, but at the same time, I do see some things that stand out. First off, we see the full triple Dekoichi, which hasn't been seen typically in Chaos Turbo always. I see the one main deck Sakuretsu Armor, which is very interesting. I like these kind of one-ofs in Chaos Turbo at the moment. They seem to be doing really well. We saw this at Worlds a lot. Just the one does shoot, one Solemn, one Saku. Kind of throw your opponent off if they're trying to make reads on how many you could potentially have. It's very hard to do when you see if I'm playing Warriors and I run into a Sakuretsu Armor game 1 against Turbo, I'm going to be keeping that in the back of my mind that maybe they have a second one. I don't know. Same with the Solemn. It's one of those cards, if you see one of them, you sometimes will expect more, and so you'll play a certain way accordingly. So yeah, shout out to Karina for getting it done with Chaos Turbo. One Sakuretsu in the main, I like that a lot to kind of shore up the aggro matchup. Yeah, very cool. All right, I'm pulling this right from the GOAT format video. It's not showing up on the website itself. So this is Patton's 13 list, second place list, and this is the kind of warrior Zaborg type deck, flip warrior, thunderclap, whatever you want to call it. There's really not a ton of flips in here though, so I don't know. Very interesting list. I see double smash and ground immediately stick out to me. We see the Abyss Soldier in the main deck, who you have the Sinister, of course, to go along with it. I am curious why no Sangan in this list. I think that should probably be included, but I don't know. Maybe there's a reason they decided not to have it in there. But very interesting. You see double Reaper to help support the Zaborg that's also in the main deck, the one Zambira. Looking pretty similar to kind of some of Rabid's list that he's done well with, minus no spies, with the kind of the Reapers instead of the spies. And of course the Abyss Soldier in here is kind of the biggest surprise to me. Very interesting. But of course, Abyss Soldier I think is an underrated card, honestly, in a lot of aspects. It's not, people think about it as just a good out to control because they, you send back their 1,000 eyes, they don't get a dark and blah, blah, blah. But really it can have a lot of, use cases. It can allow you to, push for game through your opponent's battle traps by sending back their traps. It can allow you to reset your opponent's flips. so that it kind of puts them back a turn on making their key flips resolve. Very cool card, and very interesting to see it in a warrior deck specifically. So like I said, higher monster count, we see 2 Blade Knights. The Dawn's Luke found its way into the main deck. The 1 Faith, double Reaper. Reaper, one of those cards that allows you to get aggressive or defensive depending on the situation. The Zombira to pair with some of these tributes like Reaper, and the 1 Zombira in or 1 Zaborg. I might have got those confused. I always get those cards confused. I do that every video. Just ignore me, okay? Double Smash and Ground in the main deck. Very interesting, allowing those kind of aggressive pushes to go through, making sure to get rid of your opponent's Zombiras, get rid of your opponent's Reapers, their spies. Interesting to see the double smashing in the main deck. The trap lineup, you don't have a ton of room for a ton of traps, so we don't see Torrential in here. We don't see multiple copies of Dust Tornado in here, but the standard traps that are good, Ring, Mirror Force, of course, Triple Solemn, almost mandatory in a deck like this, and is able to make room for double Trap Dust Shoot as well. So then in first place, we have Dueling High 101, who has been on a tear recently. Warriors has been dominating the PWCQs. I don't really remember. I think this is like 5 in a row now that have been won by Warriors. It's just absurd, and I am absolutely here for it. I'm 100% a fan of it. Love to see it. Love to see duelists doing well on Warriors. And of course, Dueling High has been doing really well lately with his strategy since he switched over to it. The list, in my opinion, looks pretty standard for the most part. I don't really see anything crazy. We see the full triple spy, double Mobius in the side, Reaper in the side, double Minecon in the side. Looks like a pretty standard warrior list, honestly, for the most part. But well done to Dueling High for getting his invite already right into the season. Must feel good to get that monkey off your back early. And just continuing to rack up wins, rack up top finishes is Dueling High 101. So massive shout out to him. That is going to do it. I hope this video was somewhat interesting. Listen, I know that when I do these videos where I'm just kind of rolling off the top of my head, I know sometimes they can be a little, I don't want to say awkward, but they can be a little, I just run out of thoughts, and I'm just going off the top of my head. So it'll be what it'll be. It's not going to always be perfect. I don't have that great charismatic synergy where I can just riff all the time off of everything. But at the same time, like if I have to dedicate a bunch of time to preparing ahead for certain videos, I'm just never going to publish anything. So I want to make content. At the same time, I know that I'm limited when I just roll off the top. So it is what it is. I hope you guys enjoyed it very much. I really, really appreciate it. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you all around. Bye.